She bought a house for $700 so her mother could finally breathe fresh air. But under the old floorboards, they found not dust, but traces of a crime that had been covered up for years. Look what the forgotten house was hiding. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. She had not driven this far in years. The road curled through a fog that clung to the shoulders of the pines, a silver mist that seemed to whisper as it passed the car windows. Beside her, her mother sat quietly, her small hands folded over a wool blanket that trembled with every bump in the road. It had been her idea to come here, her voice frail but insistent when she saw the photograph online. A wooden house that leaned over the edge of a small lake, its reflection trembling in the still water. "It looks alive," her mother had said, "like something that remembers." At first, she, once a detective, now a weary realtor, had laughed. There were 1,000 forgotten homes across the state, left behind after old programs failed or owners died. But something in her mother's eyes stopped her. They had grown dim lately, as if the world no longer reached them. When she spoke about the house, though, there was a light there, a spark of the woman she used to be. That was what made the daughter look up the listing later that night. The file was strange. The property had belonged to the local government, marked non-essential asset, and listed for $700, less than the price of a used fridge. A brief note said, "Maintenance discontinued, unfit for commercial resale." No mention of why. No photos of the interior. Just one shot from across the water, the house half hidden by reeds and fog. She stared at that picture for a long time. The house seemed to be watching her back. By the end of the week, she had signed the papers. The drive took most of the morning. When the asphalt gave way to gravel, her mother's hand tightened around hers. "It smells like rain," she whispered. The scent of wet pine drifted through the open window. The sky was soft and gray, the kind of gray that promised calm rather than storm. Then the lake appeared, silent, smooth as glass, surrounded by forest and rocky slopes that caught the mist like a shawl. The house stood on wooden stilts that sank into the shallow edge of the water. It was larger than she expected, not a shack, but a modest cabin with a slanted mossy roof and a veranda that reached out toward the lake. When she turned off the engine, the silence pressed against the car like a living thing. Her mother smiled faintly. "He built it right on the water. Brave soul." "Who?" she asked, though she knew her mother didn't mean anyone specific. They stepped out. The boards of the small dock creaked beneath their weight. The house smelled of cedar, rain, and time. A single chair rested on the porch, coated with a thin layer of dust. Inside, the air was cold, but dry. There was one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, and a small attic reachable by a narrow ladder. Everything was simple, handmade, shelves uneven, nails exposed, but solid. She had expected neglect. What she felt instead was order, a kind of quiet intention. Someone had cared about this place. Her mother wandered slowly through the room, tracing her fingers along the wall. "It's not empty," she murmured. "It's resting." They unpacked the few boxes they brought, blankets, clothes, the kettle, her mother's medications. And by evening, the house glowed with the faint warmth of their presence. She lit a fire in the small stove, listening to the wood crackle. Outside, the lake reflected the last scraps of daylight. Later, when her mother slept, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the fog return. It rolled across the surface of the water, thick and deliberate. Somewhere below, fish rippled through the reeds. Then a faint sound reached her, a sharp tap, like a knock from beneath the floorboards. She froze. The sound came again, once, then silence. She tried to dismiss it as the shifting of wood, the sigh of settling beams. Houses this old always spoke in their own ways. But when she returned inside, she saw her mother standing in the doorway of the bedroom, her eyes calm but alert. "You heard it too," the old woman said softly. "It's just the lake," she replied. Her mother shook her head. "No, it's memory." She said nothing. She helped her mother back to bed, tucked the blanket around her shoulders, and stayed beside her until her breathing steadied. Then she sat again by the fire, staring into the flames, replaying the sound in her mind. Memory. She hadn't thought about her old work in months, how every small detail once had meaning, how silence could speak louder than words. She pushed the thought away. That part of her life was gone. She sold houses now. She took care of her mother. She didn't chase ghosts anymore. Still, she couldn't help herself. Before going to bed, she crouched by the spot where she thought the sound had come from. The floorboards were uneven, and one nail had rusted through. She pressed her palm against the wood. It was warm. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window and painted the room in gold. The house looked almost new. Her mother sat on the veranda, breathing deeply, her face lifted to the sky. "I can breathe again," she said, smiling. For the first time in months, the daughter smiled too. She made breakfast, simple toast, and coffee, and they ate in silence, listening to the wind comb through the trees. In the afternoon, she walked around the property, taking notes out of habit. The land sloped gently into the lake. There were remnants of an old shed half collapsed near the tree line, and behind it, a wooden post with a rusted chain. She wondered what it had been for. Maybe a boat? By evening, a strange peace had settled over her. It wasn't happiness exactly, but a loosening of something inside her. The city felt far away. Her phone barely had service. The world had shrunk to this house, this lake, her mother's steady breathing. That night, she dreamed of water. In the dream, the lake was a mirror, and beneath its surface, she could see a woman's reflection, calm, intent, working on something. Her hands held a hammer, her clothes were wet. When the woman looked up, her face was shadowed, but her lips moved as if to speak. The sound never came. She woke just before dawn, her skin cold, her throat tight. Her mother was awake too, sitting by the window, watching the mist drift over the lake. She was building, her mother said quietly, as if answering a question. Who? The one who lived here before. Her mother's voice was calm, certain. She didn't sound frightened. If anything, she sounded comforted. She wanted to argue, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the look in her mother's eyes, or the faint scent of wet soil and wood that seemed stronger than before. Later that day, she found an old key on the veranda. It lay between two boards, dull and corroded, but it hadn't been there yesterday. She picked it up and held it to the light. It was small, made of brass, its teeth worn smooth from years of use. She slipped it into her pocket. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, she sat beside her mother on the porch. The air was cool and smelled of moss and pine. The lake caught the color of the sky, turning orange, then violet, then almost black. Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. "We were supposed to find this place," she said. "I don't know why yet, but we were." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. When the stars came out, she felt the same silence press around her as it had that first moment they arrived. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. Before going inside, she looked once more at the water. Something, a ripple, a glimmer, moved near the wooden supports beneath the veranda. For a second, she thought she saw light, faint and bluish, as if a lantern burned somewhere below. Then it was gone. She stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. Behind her, The house creaked softly, as though exhaling. The fire inside still glowed. Her mother was already asleep, her breathing even and deep. She turned off the lamp, sat beside the bed for a moment, and whispered, "We're safe here." But as she lay down, her hand brushed against the key in her pocket, and a thought flickered in her mind, quiet, uninvited. No house is ever truly empty. The sound of water lapping beneath the floorboards followed her into sleep. Morning came quietly to the lake, pale light slipping through the mist like breath through silk. She woke to the sound of water lapping softly against the wooden stilts beneath the house. The air smelled of wet pine and smoke from last night's fire. Her mother was already awake, sitting on the veranda with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the fog drift across the water. "It's so still," her mother murmured. "Even the air doesn't want to move." She made coffee and joined her, handing her the steaming mug. The silence was thick, but not heavy. It was the kind of quiet that listened back. For a while they sat together, saying nothing, until her mother finally whispered, "I dreamed of her again." "Who?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The woman by the water," her mother said. She wasn't sad this time. She looked busy, like she was building something. Her chest tightened, but she smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what this place does. It makes us dream of the people who built it." Her mother nodded and didn't say more. The daughter watched her sip the coffee, her thin fingers trembling just slightly. There was color in her cheeks now, the faintest trace of health returning. The lake air was helping. The doctor had been right about that. When her mother went inside to rest, she stayed on the veranda, staring at the ripples near the posts under the house. Something shimmered below the surface, faint as a breath. Probably sunlight caught in the water, she told herself. But the clouds hadn't lifted. She shook the thought away and turned back inside to finish unpacking. The rest of the morning passed in quiet work. She scrubbed the floors, aired the sheets, repaired a loose hinge on the bedroom door. The rhythm of manual labor soothed her, until the brush she was using to clean the floor snagged against something. It made a hollow sound, unlike wood. She frowned, ran her fingers over the spot, and felt the faint outline of a rectangular seam. The board there was slightly warped, its edges darker than the rest. She hesitated for a moment. Her old instincts stirred, the curiosity that once had driven her to chase every detail, to pull apart every pattern. She had walked away from that life for a reason, she reminded herself. But something about the sound, the weight of it, made her fetch a screwdriver. The board came loose with a groan. Beneath it lay a small metal box, dull with age. It was about the size of a book, its hinges rusted but intact. She pulled it out slowly, feeling the cold of the metal seep into her skin. Dust fell away in flakes. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed handkerchief, were paper's letters, some photographs, a few stapled reports, and at the very bottom, a flash drive. Her pulse quickened. The photographs were old, but not ancient. One showed a woman in her 40s, hair tied back, wearing a work jacket and holding a clipboard. Behind her was a row of wooden frames, unfinished houses perhaps. Another photo showed her standing by this very lake, near a pile of lumber. Her eyes were bright, her smile direct. The letters were harder to read, smudged from time and moisture. Some were typed, others handwritten. She caught fragments. Funding delayed. Oversight committee. Need to finish before the inspection. And later, if this project fails, they'll erase everything. One letter stopped her cold. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to the meeting. They said we would review the budget, but I think they mean to silence me. The proof is here, but it may not be safe for long. If the house survives, Maybe someone honest will find it. Please don't let them bury this. There was no name, just a single first initial at the bottom. Her mouth went dry. She sat back against the wall, papers trembling in her hands. She'd seen letters like this before, half warnings, half confessions, but always in evidence rooms or court files, never under her own floor. The kettle whistled from the stove, breaking the spell. She gathered the papers, rewrapped them in the handkerchief, and slid the box under the table. Later, she told herself. She'd look at it later. When her mother woke, she seemed stronger, her eyes brighter. They ate soup and bread together, and her mother talked softly about planting flowers near the steps once the weather turned warmer. Something yellow, she said, so the house doesn't forget the sun. That night, after her mother fell asleep, she opened her laptop. The internet connection was weak, but enough. She searched for the name of the government housing program printed on one of the documents, Homes for Veterans. The results were sparse news clippings from a few years back, one press release full of empty promises, and then silence. Scrolling further, she found a small article from a local paper. Community official dies in boating accident. The photo was grainy, but the face was the same as the woman in the pictures. The article was brief, barely a paragraph. No investigation, no follow-up. She closed the laptop slowly. The air in the room felt heavier. From the other side of the wall came a faint creak. She froze. The sound moved, floorboard to floorboard, toward the veranda. Then, silence again. Her heart pounded. She forced herself to breathe. Houses shift, she reminded herself. Wood swells, contracts, groans. It was nothing. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the air was different, charged, like before a storm. She lay awake for a long time, the key she had found earlier, now resting on the bedside table. It glinted faintly in the moonlight, catching the glow like an eye that refused to close. The following morning, her mother spoke first at breakfast. "You look pale," she said. "I didn't sleep much." "Because of the knocking?" The spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "What knocking?" Her mother smiled faintly. "It came again last night. But I wasn't afraid. I think she's trying to speak to you." "Mom, she wants you to listen," her mother continued. "She built this place, you know. She built it for people like us. And they took it from her." Her stomach tightened. "Where did you hear that?" Her mother shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. "She told me." She set her spoon down. Her mother looked perfectly calm, her eyes clear, her tone measured. Not delirious, not confused, just certain. The certainty unnerved her more than madness would have. That afternoon, she took the flash drive into town. The small library had an old computer in the corner, and she used it while pretending to check property records. The drive contained scanned letters, reports, even bank statements. Some were encrypted, others open. The open ones told a story she recognized instantly. A local development fund, redirected, money missing, contracts reassigned to shell companies. A classic scheme greed dressed in bureaucracy. The woman from the photos had been trying to expose it. Her death suddenly looked less like an accident and more like a clean erasure. Back at the house, she watched her mother nap, the blankets rising and falling with each slow breath. A faint wind brushed through the open window, carrying the smell of rain and lake water. The house creaked again, softly, almost like a sigh. She turned toward the veranda and froze. Someone had drawn a wet handprint on the inside of the glass door. The shape was small, delicate. The water streaked downward in thin trails that caught the afternoon light. But the outside porch was dry, and the prints faced inward, as if the touch had come from the lakeside. Her first impulse was to wipe it away, but she couldn't move. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Slowly, she stepped back, one hand pressed to the table for balance. She looked again, and the print was fading, already evaporating in the sunlight. By the time her mother woke, it was gone. That evening, while sorting the documents again, she noticed one line she had missed before, scribbled in pencil at the margin of a page. "If they come for me, I'll leave proof under the water." The words made her throat tighten. She looked toward the window, toward the still, silver surface of the lake. She remembered the faint glimmer she had seen there 2 nights ago. Under the water. She closed the box and hid it in the cupboard. Her hand shook as she washed the dishes, her mind spinning. It had to be coincidence. Maybe the woman had meant metaphorical evidence, digital files, hidden somewhere online. But another part of her, the part that once followed trails through lies and half-truths, whispered otherwise. Her mother joined her on the veranda after dinner, humming softly. The old woman's voice was low and steady, a sound that seemed to blend with the water itself. "She's getting closer," her mother said suddenly. "She?" "The one you're looking for." "I'm not looking for anyone," she said, too sharply. Her mother only smiled. "You will." The wind rose, scattering the reflection of the moon into 1,000 broken pieces. The boards beneath their feet shivered with the movement of the lake. That night, the knocking returned, not from the floor this time, but from below, rhythmic, deliberate. She sat up in bed, holding her breath. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. In the silence that followed, she heard her mother whisper from the next room, "She's asking you to finish what she started." The words sank into the dark like stones. When dawn came, she walked outside barefoot. The grass was wet and cold beneath her feet. The lake was still, too still, as if waiting. She crouched near the edge and saw her reflection tired eyes, hair tangled, the faint outline of the house above her shoulder. And then, behind her reflection, a flicker of light moved under the water, a pale blue shimmer, small and steady, right beneath the veranda. She leaned closer, heart hammering. The light pulsed once, twice, as if answering her. Then it vanished, swallowed by the dark. She stood slowly, her breath shallow. Her mother's voice floated through the open window. "It's time you listened." The world around her seemed to hold its breath. The trees were still, the air unmoving, the lake a mirror once more. And somewhere, beneath all that silence, she thought she heard the faintest echo metal scraping against wood, the sound of something waiting to be found. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling, though not from fear. It was the old feeling, the one she had buried when she left her badge behind. The hunger to know. When she went back inside, she sat at the table beside the hidden box and stared at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "I'll find you." Outside, the water stirred as if in response. The night before, she decided to dive. Sleep never came. The house shifted and sighed, as if restless. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faint blue shimmer pulsing beneath the veranda. The thought wouldn't leave her. She had tried to reason with herself, to call it a trick of light or some odd reflection from the windows, but deep down she knew it wasn't. The woman who had built this house had left something behind, and the lake was guarding it. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she used to feel when a case was about to open itself. Her mother had been quiet that evening. She sat by the fire, humming an old tune that faded with the crackling wood. The daughter didn't ask her if she had seen the light, too. She already knew the answer. When her mother finally spoke, it was in a whisper so soft it was almost part of the air. "She's waiting for you to finish it," she said. The old woman's eyes were distant, but clear, reflecting the orange glow of the fire. "When you go, don't be afraid of the water. It knows the truth." Before dawn, The lake was a flat sheet of silver glass. Mist hovered just above it, thick enough to blur the horizon. She pulled on the old wetsuit she had found in the shed, its seams stiff and cold. The flashlight felt heavy in her hand, and the key she had found days earlier hung from a cord around her neck. She didn't know why she wore it. It didn't fit any lock in the house, but it felt wrong to leave it behind. Her mother sat in her chair on the veranda, wrapped in her blanket, her eyes following her every move. "If I don't come back in an hour," the daughter said quietly, "call the neighbors." Her mother smiled faintly. "There are no neighbors." She hesitated, then nodded and stepped onto the dock. The boards creaked under her weight. The smell of cold water filled her lungs as she crouched and touched the surface. It was colder than she expected, sharp as glass. Then she slid in. The first shock of the lake stole her breath. For a moment she floated, suspended between the gray sky and the dark below. The beam of her flashlight cut through the murk, revealing drifting leaves and small fish darting away. The wooden posts of the veranda stretched downward like pillars into the depths. Beneath them, she saw the faint glimmer again, a reflection off metal, small and deliberate. She swam closer. The container was wedged between two beams, tied with an old chain. Its lid was sealed with waterproof tape, the kind used for marine equipment. She pulled at the chain, but it resisted. The key at her neck tugged against the cord, brushing her chin. Without thinking, she pressed it to the lock on the chain, and it fit. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she turned it. The chain gave way with a muffled click, and the box drifted loose, heavy but buoyant. She clutched it and kicked upward, breaking the surface with a gasp. The morning light had sharpened. The fog thinned to wisps. On the veranda, her mother sat unmoving, her hands clasped tightly together. The daughter hauled the container onto the dock and sat beside it, shivering. The key hung wet and glinting around her neck. She looked at it for a moment, realizing that it had been waiting to do this all along. When she opened the box, she half expected nothing but sludge and decay. Instead, everything inside was dry and clean. Bundled papers, a notebook sealed in plastic, several photographs, and an old tape recorder. She set them on the dock, one by one, her hands trembling. The handwriting on the notebook matched the letters she had found under the floor. The first page read, "If you found this, you already know too much. I couldn't stop them, but maybe you can make them seen." She began to read. Each entry was careful, factual, like a report written for no one but herself. The woman had documented everything, the missing funds, the falsified contracts, the anonymous warnings she received from colleagues. And then, near the end, the tone changed. "They told me to drop it. Said I was making trouble. Yesterday, I found my car tires slashed. Someone's been calling at night and hanging up. I'm not afraid for myself, but for the project. It was meant for people who needed hope, not for them to profit from it. If they silence me, this will stay here. Someone honest will come. Someone who still listens." She stopped reading, her eyes stinging. The words felt alive, pressing into her chest. Behind her, the water lapped softly, rhythmic as breathing. She picked up the tape recorder, wiped the surface dry, and pressed play. For a moment, there was only static. Then a woman's voice filled the silence. Low, calm, measured. The kind of voice that spoke to be believed. "This is the final record," the voice said. "If you're hearing this, it means they succeeded. They called it an accident. Don't let it end there." The tape clicked and went silent. Her hand shook as she turned it off. Around her, the lake looked unchanged. Gray water, distant trees, quiet air. But the world itself felt different. She wasn't just inside someone else's story anymore. She was part of its continuation. When she brought the box inside, her mother was waiting by the door. "You found it," she said softly, not as a question but a certainty. "I did." Her mother nodded, eyes glistening. "Then she can rest." That afternoon, she drove into town. The air smelled of rain again, and the road gleamed with puddles that mirrored the sky. She parked outside a small cafe that shared its building with the local newspaper office. The editor there owed her a favor from a case long ago. He was older now, heavier, slower, but he still remembered how to listen. When she laid the papers and photos on his desk, he whistled low. "You sure about this?" he asked. She nodded. "No names. Publish it as an anonymous source. Let the evidence speak." He studied her for a moment, then gathered the documents carefully. "It'll take a few days. Make it right," she said, standing. "That's all I want." When she returned home, dusk had settled over the lake. The windows glowed faintly with the reflection of the water. Her mother was still on the veranda, her face peaceful, her eyes watching the horizon. "They'll know soon," the daughter said. "I know," her mother whispered. "So does she." That night, she dreamed again of the woman by the water. This time, the woman was smiling. Her hands rested on the frame of an unfinished window, the house bright with morning light. When she turned, her face was clear strong, alive and unafraid. She lifted one hand in silent thanks before fading into the reflection. She woke to sunlight spilling across the floor. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the sound of gentle breathing drew her gaze to the veranda. Her mother sat, slumped in the chair, her blanket fallen to the floor, her face serene. The daughter stood still, knowing before she touched her that it was over. Her mother's eyes were closed, her lips curved faintly as if caught mid-smile. The world was unbearably quiet. She knelt beside her, tears spilling freely now, but there was no fear in them. Only peace. Her mother's hand was cool, her fingers still curved as though holding something invisible. When she pried them open, she found the small brass key lying there, dry and gleaming in the morning light. The next few days passed like a blur of motion without sound. The funeral was small. There were no relatives left to come. She buried her mother beneath the willow near the lake, where the wind could always reach. As the soil fell, the air seemed to sigh around her, the ripple spreading gently across the water. She stayed by the grave long after everyone else had gone. The lake reflected the sky again, unbroken and endless. Somewhere in that reflection, she imagined her mother's face, soft, content, watching over the house she had loved. In the weeks that followed, the story hit the news. The anonymous report about government corruption spread through the county. Names were printed, resignations filed. A hearing was scheduled. For the first time in years, someone spoke publicly about the veterans' housing scandal. And in every article, there was a photograph of the lake house, once dismissed as worthless, now recognized as the last trace of the woman who tried to tell the truth. People came to see it, some out of curiosity, others in reverence. She let them look, but never inside. The house was not a museum. It was alive. It had done its part. When winter came, the visitors stopped. Snow fell softly over the lake, turning the world white and still. Inside, she lit fires again, brewed tea, and filled the silence with the sound of her mother's favorite records. She repaired the veranda railings and replaced the broken step. The work kept her hands busy, her mind steady. One evening, she stood by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. The water was frozen now, smooth as glass. Beneath the surface, shadows moved, branches, fish, or perhaps only her imagination. But she thought she saw a faint glow under the ice, the same blue pulse she had once followed. She didn't look away. She smiled instead. "Thank you," she whispered. The glow flickered once, then went still. In the spring, she started rebuilding the small shed near the trees. It took weeks of slow labor cutting, sanding, painting, but when it was done, the structure looked simple and warm. She placed a wooden sign above the door. Haven House. It would be a shelter for women with nowhere to go, women who needed a beginning again. At first, only one woman came, a mother with a child, both exhausted from the city. Then another, and another. The house never felt crowded, only full, as though it had been waiting for this purpose all along. Sometimes at night, when she walked down to the lake to check the boats, she felt the same calm weight in the air, the same sense of presence. She would stop, listen, and whisper into the dark, "We did it." The wind always answered softly, stirring the water just enough to make it breathe. Years later, she would think back to that morning drive, the road curling through mist and pine, her mother's frail hand clutching hers, and realize that it had never been an accident. The house had chosen them, not the other way around. On quiet evenings, when the moon lay across the water and the trees whispered in the distance, she would sit on the veranda alone and listen. And sometimes, if the night was still enough, she could hear faint hammering from across the lake, like someone building again, piece by piece, something that would never be forgotten. The house above the water glowed softly from within, a warm pulse in the dark, holding all the stories it had kept, of loss, of truth, and of the women who refused to be silenced. It had been sold for $700, but it was worth far more than anyone could count. Now it belonged to no one, and to everyone who needed to believe that even in silence, a voice can rise again. And when the morning light broke over the lake, the house seemed to exhale, a slow, grateful breath, as though it too had finally found peace. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next one, and share this video with someone who still believes that every home holds a secret.